Welcome to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
And my name is Martin Gonzalez.
And this is episode 66, where we're going to review a game about great old ones who will consume the world and all of your money. Arkham Horror, the card game. But before we get started with this episode, you all are going to know, if you've listened to the show before, something is different. Something is afoot, because I'm not joined today by Carter Mackey. I am joined by the illustrious, nay, the notorious Martin Gonzalez, who you may know as Martin G from the Facebook Solo Board Gamers group. Martin, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super thrilled and excited. You know, like, pinch me. I'm on Solosaurus. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. I've spent so many hours on the Solo Board Gamers group on Facebook. And you know, there's a funny thing that happens. No matter when I'm on there seems to be a post from you and or Fletcher, your dog.
Yes.
Reviewing a game or plugging a game. And I always find myself thinking, should I buy that game? It turns out a lot of people just give into that temptation, don't they?
Yeah, they do. And I hope that they trust Fletcher's taste. I mean, I know it's not very common to have a board game reviewing dog, but, you know, so far, most of his recommendations have turned out okay for me. The thing is, he never stops talking in my head. That's the thing about Fletcher, you know, if I have to be honest, yeah.
Yeah. You might want to consult a professional about that.
The vet doesn't really have any advice for me.
If you haven't checked out some of Martin's reviews and posts on the Solo Board Gamers group on Facebook, or if you're not part of that group yet, you definitely should be. That's the way that I keep in touch with a lot of what's going on in the Solo Board Gamers world. And I would say that Carter does the same thing, but let's be honest, he doesn't keep that close in touch with what's going on. He just is happy to be part of the show.
Yeah, no, and Brandon, I just want to say that I do believe that Fletcher is the only dog who has a geek list of board game reviews and Board Game Geek. Just want to put that out there.
Ooh, see, now that is special. I think if you'll send me a link after we record, I'm going to put that in the show notes so everybody can go check out the games that Fletcher, obviously, not you, Fletcher.
Yes, I will absolutely do that.
Well, a couple of more things before we get started. The first thing is that we are going to have a special announcement at the end of this episode, a very big announcement. So if you would, please stick around for that. Don't just cut off the episode before it's done. You're going to want to stick around to hear what we have to say about that. And also, one more thing before we get into the review. It's the news. We always start with the news. And the news comes to us this week and every week from tableforone.me. And our first bit of news this week is that Garphill Games, or Garphill Games, I've never been 100% sure how to pronounce that, has announced an expansion to Paladins of the West Kingdom called Paladins of the West Kingdom City of Crowns. Have you played Paladins of the West Kingdom?
I have not, but I am a recent convert and fan to Garphill Games because I actually purchased Architects of the West Kingdom, and then right after, like the day after, I saw a deal for Paladins, so I bought them all within 2 days, and I cried a little. My wallet cried a little tear, but I'm loving Architects, and I'm looking forward to Paladins.
Architects is so good. It's such a good, interesting game, and I really enjoyed Paladins too, although it's definitely a heavier, kind of crunchier, more involved experience. We enjoyed that one too, though not quite as much as Architects, but honestly, at this point, anytime that Garphill Games does something, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, same here for sure. And also the fact that they really do, for some of their games, very nice streamlined solo modes. The solo AI deck in Architects was just very easy to operate. That's what I appreciate, right? A very easy to operate, but still very interesting solo mode. And they seem to have solved that problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Architects solo mode is so good. And the same is true for Paladins, although it's a little more involved, but it's also more interesting to play against. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, the way that there always is with these things. But I really found both of them to be quite interesting. Apparently, this new expansion is going to add new board extensions for both the main board and the player board.
Mm-hmm.
There will be new actions, and you're going to be trying to get the support of nobles to come and help you as you defend against the hordes who are coming to the city. No information on release date yet, but I'm paying attention to this one, and my guess is that, like us, a lot of people out there are going to be doing the same. So check out Paladins of the West Kingdom City of Crowns when that comes out. Our second bit of news this week is that Alexander Pfister has announced on Twitter, I believe, an expansion for Maracaibo called Maracaibo Uprising. Maracaibo is a big box game from Alexander Pfister, who is one of the most well-known new designers in the big box heavy Euro space in the last several years, especially well known for Great Western Trail and Maracaibo. So even though that game is relatively new, it's gotten a lot of attention. It was one of the games that got a stamp of approval from us.
I have not played Maracaibo, but I am getting a lot of word about it from folks on the Solo Board Gamers Facebook group, so I'm getting very interested in it.
What's really neat to me is it's like kind of a rondel game, basically a big rondel. The whole board is one giant circle that you're going to be going around taking actions. And you do lots of Euro things while you're traveling around, but it has a piratey kind of theme to it.
Okay.
And then it has a campaign, and that kind of unfolds over the course of several games in this big kind of multi-game experience with a story and everything. It just sort of feels like it pushes the boundaries of what big box Euros do, which is the sort of thing that grabs me. And I would assume, based on some of the things I've seen online, probably more up your alley than some other Euro games as well.
Yeah, I like my Euro games with a very large helping of theme. And so if you're telling me that this one has a good theme driving it, then I'm definitely interested.
I think I would say that it does have a theme, and it does have a story. I don't know that I would call it the most thematic game that I've ever played, but just not setting it in the Mediterranean, having you take on the role of a merchant is a win, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, what's neat to me about this new expansion is based on what Alexander Pfister has said in this tweet is you're going to have asymmetrical ship upgrades, which if you've played the game or listened to our review, you'll know upgrading your ship is a big part of the game. And, you can become a little more specialized over the course of the game based on how you upgrade. That's really neat. But as soon as somebody says the word asymmetrical, my ears immediately perk up. My number one favorite thing in board games is asymmetrical player powers.
Yep.
Like by a mile. So if you're adding asymmetry to this, I'm on board for that. There's going to be new villages, new cards, new chapters, new legacy tiles, and another thing that's always going to make me pay attention, double layered player boards.
Ooh.
I love
like
it.
those.
I love it. There's nothing worse than knocking the table and seeing your pieces go everywhere after you've worked up the courage and the energy to set the thing up to begin with, right?
I'm staring at my copy of Terraforming Mars on my shelf right now with dagger eyes because of that.
I know. I eventually had to throw away those player boards and just buy a broken token because I couldn't handle it anymore.
Just on BGG yesterday, I saw the Kickstarter double layer boards. So I think it's 2 layers of cardboard, cutouts on the top layer for a price that I might just have to buy into.
Oh, yeah. I saw those. Those are really nice. Those came with the Turmoil Kickstarter, I think, back when they were doing that. And I didn't get in on that because I haven't been crazy about a lot of the expansions for Terraforming Mars. But I saw those boards and I was like, come on, man, you couldn't give me those boards in the base box.
I know.
Because once you knock those trackers, it's all over.
It's right. But you have to take a picture of your board at the start of each round just to make sure as a failsafe.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been really happy with having the double layer boards in other games. So seeing it come to this into Maracaibo is so cool. So if you like Maracaibo and you're interested in this expansion, this is Maracaibo Uprising, and that will be coming out sometime in 2021. And last bit of news for this week is a Mr. Pfister announcement again. Capstone Games has announced a new game from Alexander Pfister called Cloud Age. Martin, let me paint a picture for you. Cloud Age, according to BGG, is a dystopian big box Euro game in which players travel around in an airship over a post-apocalyptic landscape.
Brandon, as you were talking, the hairs stood up on my arms in awe and wonder because you said the magic words. Dystopian, post-apocalyptic, airship. There's nothing about those words I don't like.
What's interesting to me is this feels like he's moving beyond some of the things that he started in Maracaibo. So Maracaibo got a lot of attention for the campaign and the like pseudo legacy elements of that game. This is also going to have a campaign and story play element to it, but it's going to be lighter than Maracaibo, plays around 90 minutes, and includes deck building, engine building, and resource management.
I love deck building. I love engine building. I foresee falling into this hole very, very heavily.
Man, me too. I just, everything about that sounds so good. And really, my patience is wearing pretty thin for the 3-hour big box game nowadays because I just don't have the time or the energy to do it. But 90 minutes is kind of a sweet spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah, campaign play, 90 minutes. This is going to release sometime before the end of 2020, according to Board Game Geek. And I really hope that's true because this looks to be one of the most promising Euro games of the year. That is Cloud Age from Alexander Pfister and publisher Capstone Games. All right, folks, that's all that we've got for the news this episode. So before we get into the review, let me just say that this episode is sponsored by Stone Valley Games. Stone Valley Games. You've heard us talk about them on this show so many times. Have you ever shopped there before, Martin?
I have not, but I have interacted with Eric, the person who runs Stone Valley Games, and I just love... Last time we spoke for 2 hours on the phone. Wow. He's a very, very cool and interesting person. Yeah.
Yeah, he's such a nice guy. And he reached out to us a while back now to talk about sponsoring the show. And he has just gone above and beyond to try to track down games that would be good for us to review on here. He's been so supportive and kind. But even apart from that, my experience just as a customer buying games from Stone Valley Games has been so positive because I'll place an order or a pre-order and my stuff arrives in a timely fashion. It's well priced, very competitively priced. There's a rewards program. And when my stuff arrives, it is packed beautifully. I think I said this in my last episode, but the Hulk hero pack that I got for Marvel Champions, because I have a problem and I can't stop buying packs for Marvel Champions.
I hear ya.
It came so beautifully packed. I felt like I could have tossed it off a bridge or a cliff and it would have been just fine. Partly because it's Hulk and partly because it was perfectly packed.
Well, Hulk may smash, but the Stone Valley wrapping and packing is next to none.
See, I don't understand why that's not a slogan that they're using all the time.
We got to workshop that one. That was a little bit awkward. A few more drafts and we'll get that right.
Yeah, we're getting there. So yeah, if you haven't checked out Stone Valley Games, folks, go to stonevalleygames.com. They're a really excellent company, and it's a great place to buy games, especially if you're a solo player, because they do have a focus on that. So check them out at stonevalleygames.com. All right, on to the review, and this time we are reviewing Arkham Horror, the card game. Arkham Horror comes to us from designers Nate French and Matthew Newman, and it is published by Fantasy Flight Games. It was released in 2016 and plays 1 to 2 players or 1 to 3 players if you have 2 core sets. In Arkham Horror, the card game, you're going to take on the role of 1 or 2 investigators who are seeking to unravel the mysteries surrounding strange happenings in our world. And like many other games based on the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, you will uncover clues, gain equipment, and fight cultists and monsters while trying to avoid dying and, losing your mind. If you can solve the mystery, stop the ritual, etc. before you die or time runs out, you win the game. And otherwise, you lose. And you should just know going in, you'll probably lose.
You're going to lose.
Yeah, you're going to lose. I mean, it's a Lovecraft game, right? If you didn't have that sense of dread seeped its way into the mechanics, would you even be playing a Lovecraft game?
You have to go in thinking that it's just hopeless. So in the very, very small percentage of times when you actually don't lose, it's even greater. It's a cause for celebration.
Exactly. See, that's how I like to think about it. Actually, that's how I approach all of life. If you go in just assuming you're going to lose or be disappointed, you'll only be happy when things work out.
It's a good way to look at things.
I'm working through that with my therapist. We'll get back to that later. So just as an overview kind of what this review is going to be, there's a lot of different kinds of content out there for this game. We can't possibly review all of it in a timely fashion on this show. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on the core set and kind of the core mechanics of this game so that people who are interested in finding out for themselves whether this might be a good fit, they can hear a little bit about that and make that decision based on that information. But you've got to know the game is not just the core set. In fact, the core set barely gets you into this game. So
yeah, absolutely.
This is a living card game. And have you ever played another living card game before, Martin?
Oh, you know it. I've played the Marvel Champions. I love the Marvel Champions.
My man, that's exactly what I was hoping to hear. That's my game of choice. And if you're not familiar with living card games, they're similar to the collectible card games of yore, similar to like Pokemon, the trading card game, or Magic the Gathering or something like that. Only you're not buying packs of random cards to build a deck. You're getting lots and lots of new cards all the time on a regular basis, but they come in set expansion packs, similar to expansions for any other board game. So you're going to get the same cards as everyone else. And Fantasy Flight Games is known for their LCGs. And they're known for burning a hole right through your wallet.
Oh, yeah. But that said, I think that, if you're into it, they're very, very good at this experience, at making sure that, that you get value for your money, I think. Brandon, by the way, I went in deep on this point of types of content. Do you want to know if you wanted to purchase every single thing for Arkham Horror, the living card game, what that would cost you?
I'm afraid, but yes, I do want to know.
So if you wanted to get all of the core boxes, the expansions, the cycle packs, the one-offs, the newer return to boxes, and the one-off investigator packs, and the playmats, that would cost you a grand total of $1,115.
Oh my goodness. Almost as much as a copy of Kingdom Death. I'm kidding.
It's a great deal.
I mean, that's a ton of money, but you've got to know going in that the core box is like, I think when I got it, it was like $30 or something like that, 35.
Yeah, no, same.
I mean, like a standard drug dealer, they give you they give you just a taste. They give just a little. You guys know drugs. Yeah, they they give you just a little taste to get you hooked. And then before you know it, you're buying $15 pack after $15 pack. But I mean, yeah. I think it's good to know going in then what you're getting yourself into, because if you really like it, Martin has said, you can pay $1,000 if you want to get everything, but you don't have to do all of that. You don't need all of that stuff.
Right. And you don't feel it. You don't feel the whole, laying out $1,000 right in one go. It's as Brandon said, it's $15 here, it's $25 here, it's $30 here. The blow is spread out over a long period of time. And you're getting a lot of enjoyment and value in return for, each one of those cash layouts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's definitely the sort of thing that, it can be very expensive. I don't want to diminish that. But, you need to know, too, that some of this isn't even going to be a good fit for the way that you like to play. So just so that you know, the way that the game is set up is you can get a core set. That's going to come with 3 scenarios. And those 3 scenarios are linked together into sort of a mini campaign that you can play through. After you're done with that, you can then get into one of the cycles. So the way that the expansions are set up, or the main expansions, a new story cycle will start with a big box expansion like Dunwich Legacy, for instance, which follows the Dunwich horror kind of storyline and Lovecraft's stories. And then after that big box expansion, there's a series of small, $15 cycle packs that you play through that will complete that story. And I think usually there's 5 or 6, Martin? Is that right?
Yeah, I believe there's 6 cycle packs, and then some of them even have the return to box that you're going to talk about in just a little bit.
Yeah, so you got the big box expansion, the cycle packs, and that's the meat of the game right there. But if you want a little bit extra, they also have these boxes that are called return to boxes. So there's Return to Night of the Zealot being the name of the campaign in the core box, Return to Dunwich Legacy. And what these boxes are, they're like little boxes that hold the cards, all the cards for that particular story arc. And they also provide new ways to play through the scenarios that are a part of that campaign.
Yeah, they give you some new encounter cards, some new player cards, and some dividers too, which I like.
Yeah, that's a really nice inclusion. It's really good just for the organizational aspect alone, because the core box itself, we'll talk about in a minute, is quite small. You're not going to be able to store everything in there anyway, so you'd have to find some alternate storage solution. So this is a way of basically selling you a box and a way to revisit content that you've already played. We'll talk a little bit more about how much replayability exists in these scenarios a little later on, but that's what return to boxes are. And then you've got these kind of smaller packs that include either just a new investigator, because you're going to take on the role of an investigator playing through an adventure. So if you want a new investigator with a new kind of special slant or new cards, you can buy one of these packs, or you can buy a kind of one-off adventure pack. So there's Murder at the Excelsior Hotel, for instance, which is, I think, one of the better ones based on the reviews that I've seen. It's a smaller, more intimate story that you could include as a side mission in your current campaign that you're playing, your current story arc, or you could just play it as a one-off, either way.
Brandon, do you know what my favorite standalone adventure is?
Is it the massive Meowrlethatep, or however you say it?
Barkham Horror, the meddling of Meowlafatep.
Okay, I knew I was going to butcher that. That looks so good. I cannot. So, full disclosure, that pack is what made me pick up a core copy of Arkham Horror finally.
So it started life as an April Fool's joke.
I heard that, and then they actually turned it into a real thing.
I think that's amazing.
I do too. So they're just like kind of side adventures in this overall world. So that's really, there's a ton of different ways to approach this game. Some people just buy the core story arcs. Some people just buy the story arcs they're interested in. Other people buy everything. But that's what's available for this game. And we can touch on that just a little bit toward the end, but we're going to mostly be talking about kind of the core experience here. Martin, let's just start by talking about the components. Thinking about the core box and the stuff that comes in it, what do you think about the components for this?
I think the components are great. If this is your first Arkham Files game, that's kind of what they call the Fantasy Flight set series of games that they do in this Lovecraftian world. It's got chaos tokens. It's got the health and the sanity tokens, which look like a heart and look like a brain. And, so these are the things that really, if this is your first experience with this type of game, they stand out because they're not just circles or squares or hexes or anything like that. Now, obviously, if you have played a number of these games, you'll realize, they do that every single game. Fantasy Flight does. But if this is your first experience, and because of the price point of the core set, the kind of like reasonable price point, it might very well be, those are eye-catching, I think. The cards themselves, physically, they're okay. I wouldn't exactly call them linen finish, which is, kind of like more premium in my mind. Physically, they work well, they shuffle well, they feel good on the table. The place where, and I don't know if this is the right place to talk about it, but the art is amazing. I mean, let's just get that out of the way right off the bat. Like each card, the art style and art level is so high and so compelling. That is very, very eye-catching. That drives the theme, right? Like that's really what sucks you into the world is that card art and the emotions that you get. So components do the job, especially for what you get in the core box.
I think I agree. I'm used to standard Fantasy Flight game quality, which is higher than this. If you've not played one of their LCGs before, I just don't think that the full linen finished card thing that they do in most of their games is even feasible using this format. It would just be too expensive for them to produce. But the cards are fine. Tokens are fine. They're not as, thick and nice as some of their other games, but they are, I think, serviceable. But I'm with you. I think the artwork is phenomenal. I really think it sets the mood and the tone. I wish that the graphic design of the cards was such that we could see more of the artwork on the cards, which is kind of a gripe that I've had with Fantasy Flight a number of times. I think their graphic design is a few years behind some other companies at this point, but there's also a lot of text on there. There's a lot of icons. There's a lot of things they've got to fit in. I'm not a graphic designer. I couldn't tell them how to do it better. So, so maybe I should shut up, but I think overall it looks pretty good.
It looks good. Now, I will give you a flip side take on the artwork. On the flip side of it, one thing that I was hoping for when I first did this game is I wish the art told a more cohesive story. But actually, they're really just standalone pieces. And they generally follow a similar style or template. It's like, take one of the characters from the game, show them locked in combat with a menace from another world, or just have a mundane scene, but with a tentacle. You know what I mean? Like, let's call a spade a spade. Like, that's standalone art pieces. They work really, really well. I just wish that, like if I'm getting the cards for a particular cycle or set, that they told a more cohesive story, more like a graphic novel kind of feel, but they're just kind of like standalone art pieces to me.
I agree with that. I've not been disappointed by any of the art or anything like that. I think it does a good job, but you're right. There is a lot of, hey, this is like our world, but with a tentacle. I think it does the job really well. It does a good job setting the mood. The only other thing I would say is that core box is frustratingly small when it comes to storing components. Like a lot of other Fantasy Flight boxes, there's zero attempt at an insert or anything like that. I think those return to boxes, for me, while they're nice for being able to help you replay a scenario or a campaign, the biggest reason to get them is storage.
Right. Yeah. And then you kind of have that voice in the back of your head saying, why didn't you just make the first box this big?
Oh, I am very familiar with that voice.
The one thing from a component standpoint that I don't know if you're going to touch on, the biggest frustration for me is the lack of a chaos bag.
Yeah, that was a really strange choice as well. So one of the things about this game is anytime you take a test, you're going to reach your hand into a bag and draw out some tokens. And they give you the tokens, but then they're like, well, just go find a bag or a cup or something. And, I've got those things, so it wasn't a big deal. But it is frustrating not to have the whole game in the box.
Especially because when I first got this game, it was a couple of years ago. I was very, very new to board gaming at the time. And I'm like, where's the chaos bag? And so I had to make do with a chaos mug. It wasn't quite as thematic as like a nice felt bag. Now, of course, I have bags all over the place, so that's fine. But
Sure, but back then, I actually had looked around for a bag and I couldn't find one of my bags. And I was like, well, I just need to find something to put this in. And I have this giant soup mug that I painted at one of those like paint your own pottery places on a date with my wife years ago that was painted to look like Harry Potter's face. And so I just put them inside, where his brain would go. And it felt weirdly appropriate and
good mashup.
So components for the game are pretty solid. There are a few issues, but nothing major, I don't think. And as far as the rules for the game are concerned, now, Martin, how did you find learning the rules for this game?
Oh boy, here we go. I'm going to try to keep my comments nice and compact here, Brandon. As you know, and then perhaps some people know famously, I really struggle with learning rules for most games, at most levels. And this was my first experience. Arkham Horror was my first experience with what I now know to be the fairly standard Fantasy Flight Games system of, we're going to give you multiple rule books. We're going to give you the Learn to Play guide. We're going to give you the reference guide, and we're going to give you the campaign guide. And we're going to spread out information kind of across all three books. And it's kind of up to you, player or players, of course we're solo, so player, to search for that stuff. And the other complicating piece here is that because the rules have to work for many different campaigns and many different like shades, and they're left kind of intentionally ambiguous, which really doesn't work for me. So I struggle. I always struggle every time I sit down to play this game. And I joke like I'm probably playing this wrong, but like there's a difference between I'm probably playing this slightly wrong, but I can get past it, versus I can't go on. I have to stop and answer these questions in my head before I move on, because otherwise it kind of invalidates the whole experience for me. And a lot of the time, that was my feeling. Like, I'm playing this game in a fog of uncertainty, and I find myself spending a lot of time looking through all these three provided rule books and not really finding the answers I need. Now, and I will just say this, now, of course, a couple of years down the road, and especially after getting used to this kind of multiple rule book system that they have in games like Marvel Champions and games like Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, now I'm a lot more used to it. So it would be interesting to me to go back now and look at the core box of Arkham Horror living card game, knowing who I am now and how more used I am now to this kind of system. And am I going to have an easier time of it? I don't know the answer to that, but my suspicion is probably not.
I remember you posting about this and talking about how difficult it was. And see, I also struggle with learning rules. I always have. It's always been the biggest barrier to me playing a game. It's not even energy or money or whatever. It's just getting through the rule book or keeping the rules in my head. But for some reason, this multiple rule book system works for me. It's not maybe my favorite way, but I like that, generally speaking, I feel like I can get into the game pretty quickly. And if I have a rules question, I can just, zip through the rules reference and find it. But I also recognize that, for one thing, when you open a box and you see 3 books inside of the box, especially a box this size, my first thought is, whoa, what did I get myself into here? It's a very overwhelming kind of feeling to see the multiple rule books staring at you. You're not supposed to read all 3 of them.
That is true.
But in this game's case, you do kind of need to read two of them. One of the issues that I have is that you've got the Learn to Play guide and then you've got the campaign guide. And I did find myself thinking like, oh, wait, where was this bit of information I needed? Is it in the campaign guide or is it in the Learn to Play guide? Because it's sort of set up like a tutorial almost for the first mission in particular. And I felt like was probably not addressed in full in the rules reference because this is a special case, right? Like this is the learning game. So it's probably not using the full rule set. I was a little frustrated by that experience. Overall, I think we had a different experience of learning the rules for this.
I think so. And like I said, it would be interesting for me to try to go back now, a couple of years down the road, or at least a year down the road. It's been a year since I got rid of my copy of Arkham Horror LCG. In kind of is now the time to talk about it, or do we want to leave that for the end about how I famously got rid of it?
Feel free to say.
So I posted on the Solo Board Gamers a video of me leaving my copy on the sidewalk with a breakup letter. I broke up with my copy of Arkham Horror LCG. I said, look, we gave it more than a good try, more than the old college try, and it just didn't work out. And it's not you, it's me. And as I'm walking away, I'm literally like backing away from this, and it's getting smaller and smaller in the distance, and then it vanishes from the frame. And that's how I left it. And that was quite controversial. And I posted that because obviously it's a super popular game, and there's a lot of people who love it. And to see someone leaving it on the sidewalk, this happened about a year ago now that I did this. It was just a frivolous thing, but it got a lot of attention, a lot of negative attention, but I have to say a lot of positive attention as well. But I will say this: I would not be opposed to just starting fresh, putting it on the table. Maybe not the core box, maybe the return to box, or the core plus the return to, because they can't. The return to doesn't stand alone. Just seeing with who I am now and how much more kind of practiced I have become. I hope, will I still experience a similar, disconnect and difficulty working through these little books?
That's a good point. I mean, there are plenty of games that I've revisited over the years that I didn't like at first or really struggled with at first. And the other thing is too, nowadays, I don't just straight read a rule book and try to make sense of a game. I can do that, but it won't go well because my first game, I'm going to spend so much time flipping back and forth through the rule book. I would say that, if you're somebody who's interested in this game, you should know people have different experiences with the rules. And you should know, too, that there are video learn-to-play guides. Fantasy Flight has made a video learn-to-play guide that is pretty good at teaching you the game. But more importantly, you can find a number of playthroughs and solo playthroughs even online that it may just help you to see the game in action. And Martin, I'm not saying you should have watched any of these or whatever. I mean, everybody learns and responds to games differently, but I would just say, but because of the popularity of this game, you do have more options out there for learning the rules than you do for some other titles. And that is really nice.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And as far as the rules of the game are concerned, one thing I was surprised by is the rules create space in a relatively short rule set, a ton of different experiences. And that is really the key selling point of the game. So we're going to move into the play of the game here for just a minute, because if we haven't said this already, this is a cooperative game. And if you're playing solo, you're going to play with either one investigator or two. I think two is usually the most popular method. I refuse to play with two characters if I can help it in any of these games. Now, have you played with one or did you play with two, Martin?
I would only ever play with two. And in my reflecting on this game and preparing for the podcast, I realize now that was probably part of my issue, is that that's a very big cognitive load, because you do think about quite a few things just operating one character and doing one turn in this game. And times two instantly makes it a much heavier load on you. So I never played this true solo, and I probably should have. I was making my own life harder.
Well, that's the only reason really, well, I should say the main reason that I only play one-handed if I can help it, because I'm a simpleton and I need everything to be as simple as possible for me to make it through a game. And I find managing two characters to be kind of a bear, especially in a game like this where resource management is so important. The downside to playing with one is that the normal difficulty does not work well for one player. There are other things about the game that scale according to the number of players. but inability to visit multiple locations on the board or inability to kind of split your efforts among different locations really makes things harder.
Yeah.
So I would strongly recommend playing with the easy setting on this. There's a way to back off the normal difficulty and the rules. I would definitely recommend that if you're playing only one investigator. I found it to be a much more enjoyable experience. But the basics of this game are going to be similar to other Lovecraft games. If you've ever played anything like, Martin, you mentioned Arkham Horror 3rd edition. My first experience of a Lovecraft game was Arkham Horror 2nd edition, and then I moved into Eldritch Horror and then into Mansions of Madness.
Mm-hmm.
And the core of those games is all basically the same.
Oh, yeah. I would agree with that.
You're moving from place to place. You're going to have the ability to investigate in the locations where you are. You can attack monsters. If you're not going to attack, you can try to evade monsters so that you can do something else. So if you're in the same room as a creature or a cultist or whatever, you can't just like search the room with a monster standing in front of you, because that's not how monsters work.
Yeah, a little awkward.
It is. Oh, sorry. Can you pause for just a moment? I need to go.
I need to pick up this clue, Mr. Ghoul.
In this game, you can also draw a card or get a resource or play cards from your hand. So I feel like in all of these games, there's a core experience of you're trying to move from place to place, attack monsters when you have to, avoid them when you can, and ultimately you're trying to focus on the objective because you are a puny mortal. You are not meant to be going up against hordes of creatures because it won't go well for you if you do that. You're really just trying to keep them at bay so that you can do what you need to do. And then in this game, on top of that, there's a lot more resource management than there is in some of the other titles. So the reason for that is that the kind of core test mechanic for this game, unlike other Lovecraft games where you're rolling dice and trying to get 5s and 6s as successes, here, making a test like an agility test or an observation test, or if you're trying to evade, you need to make an agility test. If you're going to attack, you may need to make agility or strength or something. You're not rolling dice. Instead, you are looking at your base score for that ability. So let's say I have a 2 strength and I'm trying to attack. Then you are going to be able to discard cards from your hand that have that icon in order to boost your test score, I guess. So you could card 2 cards to go from a 2 to a 4. And then you're going to reach into a Harry Potter head cup or a bag or whatever you have on hand. And you're going to draw a token, and that's going to alter your score. And it can alter it in positive ways. Usually it's going to alter it in negative ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a good point. If I can just, kind of like tag on there, is one of the cool things I found out about this game is that your cards basically have multiple use, right? Or at least double use. You could use them as a permanent kind of buff to your character, or you could make the difficult choice of using it as a one-time modification to whatever skill test you're currently doing. And I think that's really nice, like for mitigating randomness.
It's really interesting to me that you're not mitigating randomness after the fact. You're anticipating your luck, like the kind of luck you're going to have. So it's weird. You want to shoot for like 2 or 3 over your base score before you draw a token. If you're playing it safe, you want to do that. Or if you don't have the ability to do that, you want to save your cards for the ability that's on them. You may just risk it and just risk failing and not playing any cards down. But I mean, there's a significant chance that you're going to go down by 2 when you pull out one of those tokens, right? It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the most interesting thing about this game is you've got the ability to use the cards for resources. You've got the ability to use them, or I should say, the ability to use cards to get resources.
Right.
You've got the ability to alter skill tests, and you've got the ability to play the card down so that it becomes a part of like a tableau that you've got. So you could equip a gun from your hand, or you could put down a guard dog or something like that, or a talisman of some kind. And, that gives you a buff to your character that maybe has 3 uses in the case of a gun that might have ammunition or something. Or maybe it's a dog that will follow you around and protect you until it dies. And man, if you can do that, that's really important because you won't survive without buffing your characters through playing cards. But also, if you're not passing tests, life is going to be very hard for you.
To say the least.
To say the least. And so I found this game to almost feel like 2 games in one, because you've got the game of actually moving around the board. And in this case, the place that you're investigating is a series of cards that are connected to one another or not based on their adjacency in the house or the village or whatever. You've got that whole thing where you're trying to move around and find clues and get to the right place at the right time, avoid monsters. But then you've got this game that's your hand and managing your hand, and it is tense and tight. And even if that was the game, it's a very interesting game.
There's a good resource management game embedded inside this like exploration investigation combat game as well.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get the sense that when you are playing a game like this that's highly thematic, you're getting theme at the expense of mechanical crunch or interesting mechanics at the very least. And I would even say that's true, and this may get me in trouble, but that's how I feel a little bit about Eldritch Horror, for instance, or even Mansions of Madness. I love Mansions of Madness, but it's like a pretty dumb game mechanically. There's not a lot going on, right? It's just a really cool thematic experience. Here, I feel like you do get both.
I would agree with you, and I have heard that opinion expressed before, particularly about Eldritch Horror. Like if you really think about the mechanics, they're not that complicated. And why does it justify its kind of 3.3 complexity rating on BGG or whatever? It's hard for me to be objective about Eldritch Horror because it was my very, very first and still first love. It was the game that drew me into this hobby. My son actually introduced me to it. There's a lot of emotions, Brandon, wrapped up with Eldritch Horror for me. So I can't be objective about it. I flat out love that game.
Yeah, I should say too, I do also. I really love it. And I reject the idea that theme and good mechanical crunch are mutually exclusive. I think that, when that happens, it's done for a reason, as in the case of, Mansions of Madness, for instance. Burdening that experience with too many crunchy mechanics is a mistake. Or, sometimes it's bad design. But I do think that it can be done. And we've seen that in many different ways. And Eldritch Horror, we've never reviewed on this show, but I owned it for a long time because that was my first Lovecraft game that I really loved. I hated my experience with Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, which has more to do with like the environment when it was being played and the fact that our game took 8 hours to play. Yeah, gross. Gross. But yeah, Eldritch Horror is a great game. And that's even without me having like family ties wrapped up into it as well. So I think this is a winning combination as far as like mechanical crunch and theme. What's also interesting to me is that you've got this sort of timer that's counting down every turn. You're going to be adding a doom token to the main
the agenda, right?
Yeah, the agenda. The agenda of the evil thing advances as time passes. And so you're trying to get a lot of stuff done quickly before things get worse and then eventually you lose. That to me, like all that comes together in a really nice, interesting way mechanically. But here's the thing, it's very difficult. Like,
yes,
demoralizingly difficult, I would say.
You're not wrong.
And the thing is, whether you win or lose, you move forward in the campaign. And I do think that that's a good decision on the designer's part. Win or lose, you consult this book, the campaign guide, then it will tell you, okay, there's actually not just a win condition and a loss condition. There are different ways to win and different ways to lose that I didn't even know existed when I played my first scenario. If you lose and this thing is still true, then proceed to this ending. Did you expect that when you played this for the first time?
It was actually one of the really cool things about this game that I'd heard about it that made me really want to buy it and then made me really have high expectations for it. The fact that you had not just one possible resolution, but many different, and those depended on how well you did or how you advanced the act deck. That's the good things, right? The investigators do good things and succeed, and so you advance the act deck versus, you actually failed and you didn't find enough clues or whatever, and so you advance the evil's agenda deck. I think that's a really great system. That was my first encounter. Now, of course, I realize it's similar to the codex system in Arkham Horror 3rd Ed. But when I first encountered that, I'm like, wow, that's so cool. Such a great design choice. Plus, to me, the holy grail of games is that the actions and how well you do during the game have real consequences in the end game. This game, the way it was described to me, seemed tantalizingly close to that reality. I mean, I'm going to spoil my ending spiel a little bit here, but I'm an old school Call of Cthulhu RPG gamer from way back. Chaosium, the company Chaosium, did a whole bunch of Call of Cthulhu games. And this is, you're playing a pen and paper RPG with a game master and your friends in a dank basement where you're stuck for 3 days with people with questionable personal hygiene, right? But I mean, that is my gold standard. Like, you have a game master and you have a scenario, a campaign that is determining the consequences of your actions. And to me, Arkham Horror seemed to me to be a simulation of that experience without a game master. The fact that you had several possible endings depending on how you did, that was a big, big, big draw for me.
See, that's really interesting that you say that, and I totally agree. I've actually played a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, the tabletop RPG, because Carter DM'd a game for us. We were going to play through a larger campaign, but of course, like many groups, ours fell apart. But, he did a marvelous job and the system was interesting to me. That kind of reignited an interest and a passion for role-playing games. And I found myself playing more role-playing games recently and running them over Roll20 during quarantine. Actually, as part of my job, I'm in charge of the staff at the church where I'm a minister. And during quarantine, we enjoy getting to see one another normally. And because we are in quarantine, we look for ways to hang out. And I was trying to figure out a way. And one of our people said, I've always wanted to play D&D. Maybe you could run D&D for us. And that's what I've been doing recently and love it. And it's my first time kind of DMing it, but it's got me thinking about story and how stories are told, especially in a community setting. I've come to measure a game's campaign and story experience against the experience that I would get in a tabletop role-playing game, which is, to me, when it's done well, the pinnacle of that kind of experience.
I 100% agree, and I think that's awesome what you're doing.
It's been so fun, but it's gotten me thinking too, the best stories, they're going someplace, they have a definite story arc, and they tell a good yarn, but also you don't want to railroad your players as a DM with such a good story that there's no way for them to move about in it and to affect that world. They have to have agency.
Right.
They have to be, player choice has to push the story in some ways. And I feel like this is the closest I've ever come in a card game setting to getting that experience.
I 90% agree with that statement. I agree with the statement that is the closest we can get. And I'll have more to say a little later on about that subject.
Yeah. It's still not perfect by any stretch, but I just think it is this kind of ending system. And I also hate in campaign games that when you fail a mission, you have to just replay it. I'm looking at you, Gloomhaven. That's not fun to me. And so I like that this moves the story forward anyway. What I don't like is that when I posted on Facebook about how hard the game was, I got responses like, well, winning's not really that important. Whether you win or lose this game isn't really that important. It's more about the experience. I have very strong feelings about that. Because unlike an RPG, the difference in a board game or a card game setting is I'm supposed to be working to win, right? You do also in an RPG, but the game is more at the forefront here. And so I need my winning and losing to matter more. And I need to not just be okay with getting beaten to a pulp.
Yeah. You put that very, very well indeed. And I think there's a balance that needs to be struck there, right? And of course, I always joke that, well, I never win. I think
same here.
like we were saying earlier, right? So therefore, when in the 1 out of 20 times that you actually do win, it's amazing. But the essential quandary of playing a Lovecraftian game, any proper Lovecraftian game, is that especially if you go what do you call them, purists are like, there's no winning a Lovecraft game. What are you talking about? There's no winning,
right? That's right. There's only surviving
or going insane. Versus the extended universe, the Derleth, and I don't want to go too dark down the Lovecraft scholarship here, but Later on, there was like, oh, it's more action oriented. Yeah, of course you can win if you fire, enough bullets at the thing. But I think that the Arkham Files (FFG) is, obviously it's more fun. It's more fun as a game to think that you're this intrepid, plucky investigator through your wits and your attack and your agility and whatever. You actually have a chance against that night gaunt that you are fighting. It gives you a little more hope. Kind of like the balances between fidelity to the original Lovecraftian hopelessness versus give people a chance to win.
Right. And then at the other end of the spectrum is Cthulhu Death May Die, right? Which is pure pulp, just happens to be set in this kind of universe. And this is, I think, in between those two things. This is in between the purist and the Death May Die. And I like Death May Die, but it's just, it's a different kind of game. I think this strikes that balance pretty well, but it does still feel very punishing. And I definitely struggle with that. So you should know there are ways to adjust the difficulty, but especially if you're playing with only one investigator, there's only so much you can adjust it. And It's sometimes, I know that there's plenty of room for me to grow as a player and to get better at the game. And I fully recognize that. But I felt like most of my problems winning had to do with that chaos bag and had to do with just the sheer amount of randomness in this game, which for a game without dice has a punishing amount of randomness.
I will say this about the Chaos Bag, though. I started out really hating it. Just like I also had a problem with it because it wasn't dice. And there's just something, to me at least, there's just something about like chucking dice and the sound of it and the feeling of it and the rolling of it and the suspense, like going back to Eldritch Horror. Some of my most memorable moments playing with my sons, it all comes down to whether you get a 5 or 6 on this roll, and then everybody's, like standing around the table, literally like they jumped out of their chairs, and then the roll happens and then you scream, like those moments. And then there's something different about just, I'm going to put my hand into this mysterious bag. I'm going to draw a token.
Yes.
Oh boy. And it's not gone my way again. It's a lot less, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I completely agree. There's something missing when you're not chucking the dice. And I still think it's an interesting system, and I appreciate that they still went heavier on the randomness end because of all the drama that lends to an experience like this. Even though I think there's more drama in rolling the dice, like you. But I'm not allergic to luck by any stretch of the imagination. I like luck in games. Mm-hmm. But to me, it just, it felt like a lot.
I will say this about the Chaos Bag. Once it was pointed out to me that, Martin, think about it, it's actually customizable dice. If you can start a game with certain tokens not in there. The reference guide and the campaign guide gives you suggestions about, like, if you want an easy game, you include these tokens. If you want a harder game, you include these tokens. But you can make it even easier. You can actually strike that balance, which you can't do with dice without, drawing more pips on them or something like that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It is definitely easier to adjust it that way. That's a very good point. I want to circle back around to just the different types of experiences here. I like the campaign and the way that's structured. I think it's neat that you get different rewards or outcomes based on winning or losing and how you win or lose. Well, one thing about the core box is the campaign leaves a little something to be desired. There's only 3 scenarios in there, and you're going to just feel very quickly, I think, that if you like this, going to want more. I've left the core box experience with a lot of people telling me, please don't judge the game based on this. Please go and play the Dunwich Legacy expansion or Dunwich Legacy cycle or any of the other cycles because they're all better. Having played the Dunwich Legacy cycle or the Dunwich cycle, I completely agree. The core box does not begin to show off the capability of this system and how widely it can be used. It's really interesting to me to see how the game breathes when you give it more than 3 scenarios to tell a story.
Right.
I feel like after playing the Dunwich cycle, if you play the core box, you've got to give it more than just that. So don't think of it as a $30 game. Maybe think of it as a $100 game because it's going to cost you a bit to get through that first cycle. But I do think the story payoff is worth it. The story in this game is really good.
Mhm.
Really good, really interesting Lovecraft story.
It is.
And did you play through any of the other cycles or just through the core box experience?
Sadly, I just played through the core box experience. So, what I will say about this is that I think, in terms of the game design, I think they intended the core box to be kind of like the tutorial mission, right? A 3 scenario tutorial mission that
That's right.
gets your feet wet in the system, gets you used to it, and then you've played through the core box, and now you are ready. Now you're ready for the other boxes where they really cut loose from a story and design perspective and complexity and more keywords and all this stuff, but you're set up for success. I think that was the intention. I think the flip side of it for a lot of people is, judging just from the core box experience, you might not be motivated to go on because it wasn't that compelling. I think that's a real danger.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, there's definitely some value in approaching it like a tutorial because it does a good job of easing you in, I think, to the different mechanics and the different things to consider while playing. But yeah, man, it needs a little something more. And if I were recommending to somebody what to pick up, a lot of people say buy the core box and then buy a second core box so that you can do
Yeah.
more deck building. I would say that depends on what you value as a gamer. So personally, I have zero interest in deck building. Like,
Same.
at all. I don't want to spend time before a game like planning how I'm going to play the game. I just want to play it. In this game, that is definitely a viable strategy to play with the starter deck for a character because over the course of the campaign, you're going to add cards to that and kind of flesh out your deck a little bit. So the customization happens slowly if you're willing to start off with a non-custom deck. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I go back to my first experience with this was I was not a seasoned gamer, seasoned tabletop gamer. So, and I didn't come from a Magic the Gathering background. I would imagine a lot of the folks who, got this, they're like, oh, I got deck construction, just like, my days as a Magic player or whatever it is, right? And I didn't have that at all. So what my experience was, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, and now I got to find all these cards and I got to go through this list and I got to put them together. And this is just the recommended starter decks. Oh, and by the way, like you mentioned, you can only have certain characters playing together because, like, you can't have Roland Banks and Skids O'Toole in the same game because they need more copies of the same cards to make up their starter deck. So that was another layer of complexity for me that I really wasn't ready for. There was just a lot. When I first sat down to play this, I felt like, oh man, there is a lot of pre-gaming before you can actually get rolling here. And I wasn't used to it.
Yeah, I agree. And see, I didn't play Magic the Gathering at all growing up. I didn't play any of those deck builders. In fact, my first deck builder was Mage Wars, which I got earlier on in my gaming career. And I loved it. I loved that game. But even then, the part that I didn't like as much was the deck construction beforehand. But at least in that setting, the deck construction is a plan, essentially, that you are making and bringing to the table and trying to enact against the other player to see how well your plans work. And there's something exciting about that to me that helped me to overcome all the fiddliness of putting together the deck. In this kind of cooperative game environment where you're putting together a deck to see how it performs against a personless system, to me that loses all of its charm. And a lot of people disagree with that. And so you may not resonate with that at all. But I just think, to me, it's not worth the time. The customization I want comes in game. But if you are the kind of person who wants to be able to deck build right from the beginning, definitely get 2 core sets.
Yeah.
If you're not, then just move on because the better stuff is in the other expansions. So I would suggest, if you're not a deck building person, start with the Dunwich cycle, get the big box, and then work your way through the packs that make that up. And then if you like that, find another cycle with a theme that you like and move on from there. And then only if you're looking for just kind of a one-off thing, or if you want more investigator choices, would I then explore some of the other packs. As far as the return to boxes, I think for me and the way that I live my life, I would buy a return to box pretty quickly after starting a cycle just for the storage. But I'm a sick man, and you may not be. So I don't think I would recommend playing through the return to element of it for a while. I would say play through a scenario and then come back, because yes, it changes things up, but it doesn't change things up so radically that you would want to play through it right away.
So let me ask you this. Have you actually played a return to content?
Yes, I did not play all the way through the Return to Night of the Zealot, but I played the first mission of the Return to. Have you?
I have not. And so this is why I'm asking you, since I am now kind of increasingly thinking more and more, and this might come as a shock when folks in the solo board gamers actually hear me say this, I might get back into Arkham Horror, especially now that we're talking about it. My interest level is rising again.
This is a Solosaurus exclusive, folks. You just want to let you know that we heard it first right here.
Newsflash. No, so the question would be, should I buy just another core set and try my luck with that again, or should I buy a core set and the return to, for say, Night of the Zealot, try to replay the core experience, but already with the Night of the Zealot stuff? Does it round out the experience, the 46 extra encounter cards and the 20 extra player cards?
I don't think I would say that it would round out the experience enough. I would say if you need the storage, then buy it. I would recommend getting the core set and just moving on to the Dunwich Legacy. I mean, if you're not looking for a storage option, then Return to would be pretty low on my priority list. It changes things up enough that it gives you a reason to go back, because replaying through one of these campaigns, if you've already played through it, I just don't think the replayability is really there, because you've already explored the rooms. You already know, even though you won't be able to look at everything when you're going through the first time, you'll have done enough of it that most of the excitement is gone after you've played the first time. If a bit of time passes, and you've played through a couple of other cycles and you're like, I don't want to buy it, I don't want to invest in a whole nother cycle yet, then I would play through the return to boxes. So in your case, if you were unsatisfied the first time around, I would say move on to the story expansion.
Okay, I will. Thank you for that.
Hey, you're welcome. I'm very glad to hear that you are definitely going to give this another shot, and that this is definitely
oh boy,
definitely uncovered first here.
I've really stuck my foot in it this time.
I think that gives us, even though it's just kind of a cursory overview, there's a lot more going on in this game that we could talk about in this show. I think maybe now is the time to move on to a discussion of the good, the bad, and the ugly, if you're ready for that, Martin.
I believe I'm ready.
I would start by saying the good for this game is, first and foremost, the atmosphere. The atmosphere that comes from each individual game exploring the creepy rooms and trying to uncover the mystery that's there in an individual game, but also within the grander campaign structure. I just think this game, I don't want to say oozes theme because it's overused, I think, but it does ooze theme, and ooze is pretty Lovecraftian. So, so I'm just going to say it. It's got the theme, man.
I 100% agree. It's really a strong thematic game, and it brings my favorite Lovecraftian setting is the 1920s investigator Lovecraftian setting. That's where this game is. The artwork, really, beautiful artwork, brings the situations and the encounters to life. So I 100% agree with that pro.
In fact, I would say, too, that initially when I started playing this, my reaction to the atmosphere was so strong that I was like, is this going to replace Mansions of Madness for me? Spoiler alert, it doesn't, because I love Mansions of Madness. But what I love about Mansions is all the theme that comes from the app integration and the combination of that with the physical board. And this does it without the app. I mean, it really does a great job. So super impressed with that. But then combine that with, like, mechanically, a really interesting campaign structure that gives you different rewards or outcomes based on how you perform and what happened in your game, and tense moment-to-moment gameplay. The bag draws and the card plays and the resource management, I just think that's a really interesting marriage.
I 100% agree with that too. And I think it was really perceptive that you pointed out earlier that quite apart from the, move to different rooms, investigate, perform skill tests and all that, the resource management piece driven by the multi-use cards, plus the agenda, act, deck, system where you can advance the story either way, and there's consequences that are planned for in the campaign guide. Just really brilliant game design achievements here. I mean, his hat is off. As somebody who dabbles in game design, I feel like, I'm an amateur. The folks who designed this game, they are professionals. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can see the experience shining through here. And it's really remarkable to me that they push the limits of what a card game can do and feel like. I mean, it feels like a big box experience with cards on a table. And that's pretty amazing. And for me, all that is good. Now, is there anything that you would add for the good section here?
The customization piece, I don't know that we mentioned that. The fact that you earn experience and then you carry that over. And you also have permanent effects that could happen to you that carry over into your succeeding adventures to kind of give you that, getting you closer to that RPG experience where you have a character, you invest in a character, you build up that character, you deal with that character's strengths and weaknesses. Those pieces are also very strong pluses for this game for me.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. Definitely. You feel like your character grows as a person, as an agent in this story throughout the game. Yeah, very well said. So those are the things that I think are going to go on the good list here. Martin, if you're ready, let's move on to the bad. I think that this game feels fiddly to me. And what I mean by that is the nice thing about having cards set up as locations and having an agenda deck and having resources to manage, all that stuff is interesting, but it feels like I'm constantly messing with pieces. It takes a while to set up, to retrieve the cards that I need to build different card decks that are a part of the game. I also and I'll get into this in a little bit more, I don't like that the resources are separate tokens, separate from the cards themselves. As a Marvel Champions player, that is frustrating to me, where the cards themselves are the resources.
Yes.
This feels like an area of growth in the development of Champions, which shares a lot of similarities with this game.
Have you ever felt, Brandon, that you could retheme Marvel Champions with the Cthulhu mythos and just kind of marry that much more streamlined Marvel Champions system to kind of solve these fiddliness problems of this game?
You are anticipating my end discussion very well. I mean, really, though, that is something I would love to see. I would love to see them take the lessons learned from Marvel Champions and bring them here, because there's a few things like that to me feel like a step backward for when I come to this game as somebody who's already played Champions. And yeah, man, I would love to see them redo some of that.
Interesting.
I would also just echo again, and this is a combination of the luck factor that was very frustrating to me, like the fact that I do just hate the chaos bag. I really do. Even as somebody who's not allergic to randomness, that combined with the winning not being important, those two things together frustrated me quite a bit in my experience with this game.
I agree with those two things as well.
And that the core box is not really a game. It is and it's an extended tutorial and really not representative of what this system can do. And that does frustrate me. I appreciate that the price point is so low. I appreciate that the barrier to entry there is been lowered as much as it can for a game that has grown to the size that this one has. I think that they've tried their hardest there, but it's just not the game.
Yeah, I realize that now, and this is another thing that's driving me to maybe want to go back there. Take your advice and start with Core plus Dunwich Legacy and see where that takes me.
Yeah, I mean, it still may not be for everybody. I think, like, after even playing through that, there are just enough problems with the core, not problems, things about the core experience of this game that don't fit for what I'm looking for in a game. It doesn't make it one of my top games or anything, which we'll get to in a minute. But I just feel like you've got to push past that core experience. If you like it, this is just whetting your appetite. It really reminds me most of, I don't know if you ever played this, Martin, but the X-Wing Miniatures game.
I have not, no.
So when that first came out, I'm a Star Wars nut, and I love everything Star Wars, and I know you do as well, or at least I suspect you do, based on the Mandalorian rethemes I've seen.
I've rethemed 3 games of the Mandalorian. I should hope that I like Star Wars.
I really was excited for that miniatures game, but the core box was 2 TIE fighters and 1 X-Wing. And
Ooh.
I mean, I don't know what you know about miniatures games, but folks, that ain't how you play a miniatures game. It's not, that's not it. And so, I mean, it was a tutorial in a box. It was not the game. And that's how it reminded me of that again when I got here. So
Yeah.
those are the main bad things I would have to say about this game. What would you add to this list, Martin?
I would say that I really have to channel the new player, the newbie player that I was when I first encountered this. And so these are some of my thoughts that I had at the time. I said new players can expect a super high learning curve with long periods of confusion, frequent interruptions of play to look up rules, because that was my experience. And then, you and I have kind of diverged on this point, but I'll mention my point that I believe the rule books are not as clear as they could be, largely due to the need for open-ended support for many possible iterations of this game, campaign scenarios, new keywords, and all that beautiful stuff. And the other thing that I will mention that was a struggle for me was the iconography. I don't think we even touched this. As a new player coming to this, I was overwhelmed by all the new icons that I needed to learn, this whole new visual language with the lightning bolt icon that tells you that that's an instant action or whatever the heck it is, and the arrow turning back upon itself that tells you that it's I don't know what, and then just stuff like whether the monster is engaged with you or not, and whether it's a hunter or not, and all this stuff from a new player's perspective. All that stuff was just like a wave of new information washing over me and drowning me. Now, of course, post Marvel Champions, I'm like, oh yeah, no, that makes more sense, right? I can handle that. But I think that Marvel Champions streamlines this and is a much better onboarding experience for new players. Still pretty hefty. That's the other thing, that the other piece that's kind of making me feel like, now that I'm used to the Marvel Champion system, it'll be interesting to go back and see if I'm still feeling overwhelmed by all that iconography there. So those are the other cons that I would add on to, or the negative pieces that I would add on to what you've already mentioned.
Yeah, I resonate with a lot of that. And when we get to the Stomp discussion, I'm going to talk a lot more about Marvel Champions because I have a lot to say about how that compares with this. But yeah, totally agree. It is definitely a harder onboarding process for this, for sure. And the iconography was a good thing to mention because there is quite a bit of it here. And iconography is one of those things that I understand why it's important for a number of reasons. But I increasingly find myself like, I just wish I had the text though. I just wish I had like a little text reminder, and that's something I think Marvel Champions does better as well, which we can talk about in a few minutes. But anything that you would consider ugly for this game, Martin?
So yes, actually I would. The ugly piece is the very kind of famous knock on the core box, where when I first found out about it, I reacted kind of viscerally to it, which is, what? I can't play all the different iterations of characters that I want to play. I can only play certain combos of characters because you didn't give me all the cards. And I think I actually did the math on this. How many additional cards would you need to allow you to play any combo of 4 characters? And it's only about 20 cards. So if they could have added 20 more cards to the core set, then people wouldn't have been complaining about this. And then other people wouldn't have been saying, you shouldn't be complaining about that. Just buy a second core set. And then it just becomes this thing, right? And I think they learned those lessons. Fantasy Flight learned those lessons with the core box for Marvel Champions, which we will probably get to a little bit. But I think that was the ugly piece, is you did not give me a complete game in this experience. And now I understand it's a very low price point and this and that, but 20 more cards, man. Come on. 20 more cards.
Yeah, I agree. That's a frustratingly close number to just being able to have that fleshed out in the box. Absolutely agree. Anything else that you would consider ugly for this one?
I think that's it for me.
Well, let's move into the discussion of whether this is going to be a stomp of approval game for us or not. And you should know, if you're new to the show, the stomp of approval doesn't mean that, this is a game worth buying or whatever. There are lots of good games that don't get the stomp of approval. This is a pretty exceptional award that we give very rarely. It is a stomp of approval game, is a game that both of the reviewers really love and would recommend buying only for solo play. And Martin, you want to start by telling us, is this a stomp of approval game for you? I'm guessing no.
I think I telegraphed the ending here a little bit over the course of the show, but super quick. I tried. I came to this game with such high expectations of replicating my beloved kind of like college experiences with my old gaming group that had drifted apart to the four winds because life happened, just like you had mentioned. Um, can I recapture some of that magic without a DM, without a GM, in this tiny box that cost me $35 when I first bought it, that promised so many things, campaign play and branching storylines and different outcomes, different endings, and all this stuff, Um, and then I tried. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is I really, really wanted to love this game. I really did. I tried so hard. And then I would have a not so great first experience where it felt more like work and I wasn't having fun. And I just felt like I can't get over the rules piece here. I can't punch through that and get to a point where I'm just like, I know what I'm doing, and now I'm just really able to sit back and enjoy the theme, enjoy the story, enjoy the investigation, enjoy the skill tests and all that. I never felt like I got to that point. And then I'm like, okay, well, I still really want to love this game, so let me set it aside for a few months and then come back to it, try again. Maybe, it was just a fluke. But that's still, I would start playing again a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and those things were still the same. I would get into that old familiar feeling of, what the heck am I doing here? I'm not having fun. I really, really want to be having fun. I'm so frustrated. And so that's why I came to a head last year, 2019, in the fall, when I just said, you know what? I'm breaking up with you, Arkham Horror. I can't have you. I can't keep doing this to myself. So that was it. How I famously got it out of my life in a video that I posted to Solo Board Gamers of me leaving it on the sidewalk and walking away from it, and kind of being a metaphor for my relationship with this game. But I think what's become clear in the course of our conversation here is that I might be willing to give our relationship another chance.
Yeah, you've come a long way today on this game. It sounds like
we made a breakthrough here, Brandon. It's a breakthrough.
That's great. I'll take my payment by check.
So to answer the question is, does this game, do I feel it gets the stamp of approval, a permanent shining place in my solo gaming shelf of glory? Sadly, it is a noble failure in that effort, a really noble failure, but it doesn't quite make it there for me.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. This is also not going to be a stomp game for me, but I should say going in, I do think I would say this is for sure a game that even if you're only ever going to play it solo is worth picking up. I think you could play this with other people, certainly, and have a good and enjoyable cooperative experience. But as far as the design is concerned for solo play and whether solo feels like you're getting the core experience, definitely yes, I would say. And I would also say this is something that a misconception that's out there that I bought into for a long time. I felt like this was a game that you needed to play two characters in order to get the full experience. In my opinion, you do not. You can play the one player and just back off on the difficulty a little bit. It's an excellent solo experience in that regard. My problem with this game is the whole time I was playing it, I wished I was playing Marvel Champions. And that's not a knock against this game. I want to be very clear about that. When I first reviewed Marvel Champions, the game was not even out yet, and I loved it. And 2 weeks later, declared it my number one solo game. Period.
Wow.
And I wondered then, is that still going to be the case? But it is.
Wow.
I love it, and the reason I love it is the setup is streamlined. It doesn't take more than a few minutes for me to set up a game of it. It takes me maybe 30 minutes to play a game of it. And everything that I need is in my hand. There aren't There are a handful of tokens, but they're not used that often, with the exception of just a couple. And the whole experience feels like it has been streamlined into this sleek, beautiful, compact experience where I feel like I've played a very meaty, cool, interesting game in about a half hour.
No, I agree with you. I think if I had to think about it, I would say that they really took the lessons of what they've learned with all the LCGs that they've done in the past. I think that if you chart the progression from Lord of the Rings LCG to Arkham Horror LCG onto Marvel Champions, you can really trace that kind of critical line of okay, what can we do better? What can we streamline? What can we make as a better onboarding experience? This is the result. And so Marvel Champions is like the ultimate current iteration of all the fruits of their like reflection and all the fruits of what they've learned. I agree with you 100%. It's just so smooth. It doesn't require that complex deck building at the start, and it's very fast to play, but you're fully engaged with thinking about every second. And the brilliant piece of it, I will steal a insight from my friend Sean Dornan Fish, who told me this. The brilliant piece of it is using cards to pay for things you want to do, and not requiring any resource tokens and anything like that. That is chef's kiss. That is
Yes.
the piece there.
That is for me the first thing that stuck out when I went back to Arkham Horror LCG is, oh man, I've got to use tokens for this, because that is the brilliance of the Marvel Champions design. Just from like a mechanical standpoint, the cards in your hand are played down or else they're used as currency.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And I understand that there's like some nuances to adding the tokens and stuff like that, but to me it just feels like that piece of it feels like a step backward. I also really miss the alter ego and hero flipping
Mm.
mechanic. I just think the timing of that is brilliant.
Such a simple mechanism, but so impactful.
And tying it to more than just whether you are using your superhero ability or your alter ego ability, and instead linking it to whether you are taking damage or whether the
Mm-hmm.
plot is being advanced in Marvel
Mm-hmm.
Champions. That is so, there's so much wrapped up in something like you said, as simple as a card flip, and the
Mm-hmm.
timing of your card flip. And I really, really miss that being here. I mean, so for me, those are two major mechanical reasons. Thematically, I also just already have a really good Lovecraft game in Mansions of Madness. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of duplicating that. And as somebody who, I value a lean collection of games, I've been playing board games for 11 years now, and I have a collection of 28 games.
Oh
Um,
wow!
I have owned hundreds over the years, and
Right.
passed them on, but I want games that every game on my shelf to be a game that has an experience unlike anything else, or anything else that I own, I guess I should say, and that I want to play all the time, because I don't like learning rules and I want to have as few rule sets on my shelf as possible. And for me, Mansions of Madness gives me everything I want in a Lovecraft game with a very simple rule set. And I don't know, this duplicates a lot of that. The other piece of it, and this is going to sound crazy for a lot of people, is the stage of life that I'm in now. I don't need another campaign game. I
Mm-hmm.
I understand the draw of them. I feel it too. I love the idea of growing a character and progressing through a story and all of that. But what you don't think about when you first feel that draw is all of the bookkeeping needed to make that possible, and also just the organization needed to keep, okay, this character's cards separate from this other character, and what cards do I have access to again to grow my character. All that has been stripped out of scenario based games like Marvel Champions. And so for me, Arkham Horror is a more robust experience. It does have, if you're looking for a campaign, if you're looking for the exploration element of wandering through multiple locations inside of a house or a village or whatever, Marvel Champions doesn't have that.
No.
But that also means that its rule set is leaner, there's less bookkeeping, and I can play 30-minute session and be done, and I don't have to come back to it 2 months later and go, no, wait, what happened in the story again? Where was I in all of this?
Right.
And that's more what I'm after. In fact, looking at the games on my shelf right now, of all the games that I own, only one of them is a campaign based game. Um,
Hmm.
and ultimately, that's why I went with Mansions of Madness over Lord of the Rings: Journeys in Middle Earth. Is I liked the scenario based approach more than the campaign approach. And I say all that to say that you may not be looking for that. You may want a campaign experience. You may value the growth over the streamlined setup and everything. If that's the case, Arkham Horror is your Huckleberry. Uh, I'm interested to see if Marvel Champions adds that with the new Rise of Red Skull expansion that's coming out in just like a week or so, actually.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
up to now, it really doesn't have that. And so if that's what you're looking for, you definitely want to go with Arkham Horror. I would also say that I really hope that there is a second edition of this game, and I really hope that it takes a lot of the elements from Marvel Champions and uses it to streamline the system. Because if it does, I will spend a lot of money to
Ooh,
buy to buy this game. I think I feel like I'm waiting on a second edition of this.
you heard it here first, folks.
A lot of
I
what you
mean,
were saying, I resonate with. You know,
I 100% agree. If we could take the mechanical learns, and the streamlining of Marble Champions, and then mash them up with a really good Lovecraft story, I mean, just the old school Call of Cthulhu RPG gamer in me would just be like, I am all over that. I'd be all over that so fast. Um, yeah, yeah, no, that sounds like gaming nirvana for me.
it does for me too, and I anxiously await Fantasy Flight's announcement after they hear this episode, letting us all
If
know
they
they
don't,
decided to end it.
if they don't, then there might just be somebody out there with a track record of retheming games who's crazy enough to take on this type of project. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Interesting. You heard it here first, folks. This is an episode full of exclusives. Martin has committed to retheming everything in Arkham
Oh,
Horror.
it's funny how the words that come out of my mouth are like, this might happen, and then they get converted into, this is going to happen out of your mouth. It's crazy how that.
I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about, Martin. Yeah, this is not going to be a stomp of approval game for us. But if you're looking for a really interesting atmospheric card game Lovecraft experience, there's nothing else out there like this game. And so, even though it's not a game that'll get the stomp, I have to say I don't think it's a bad game. I just don't. I think it does what it does incredibly well, and it, for a lot of people, it's a number one solo game for a lot of folks, and there's a reason for that. It's a special kind of game.
It is for sure, and as I told as I told Arkham Horror when I left it on the sidewalk and I was walking away, I'm like, it's not you, it's me.
I echo that 100%. Well, that's going to be it for our review of Arkham Horror, the card game. And many thanks to Martin. Thank you so much for being on the show. Very much appreciate your
Thank
time and
you.
the energy you put into
Wow.
this.
This has been a really awesome. I really really enjoyed our conversation about this. This is awesome.
I did too. Thank you. Thanks for being part of it. It's I've enjoyed all the episodes I've done with Carter, but it's really nice to switch it up and have a conversation with somebody else. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Before we end the show, it's time for that big announcement that I referenced at the beginning here. One of the reasons that I originally started this show was because I wanted to have a place, a show for people who are interested in solo board games and interested in learning the news, but who also want a critical eye and want an in-depth discussion of the games and want to really think through their purchases before they buy. There has been, frankly, just an unhealthy amount of overbuying from my perspective of games that won't ever get played, or games that just aren't thought about critically before they're picked up. And if you're a person of means and you have the ability to do that, that's great. But I've seen a lot of people who don't, and who who could think through their decisions a little better before they make them. And so, it's too much to ask of each individual person to do that on their own, to evaluate them without, going out to buy them. And so we started this show as a way to do that for you. And I've really enjoyed that process and loved that process, and just also enjoyed, frankly, getting to spend time with Carter and talking about cool games that are coming out that we like to pick apart and analyze. And it's been a wonderful experience. But it is time for Carter and I to stop hosting Solosaurus. There are a number of reasons for that I won't go into in depth on the show because they are personal, but we're not, Carter and I are still friends. We're not giving up gaming. We are not going through a major life, disaster or anything like that. There are just other things in our life that need to shift in order for us to make family and work and a few other things a higher priority. We need to shift those things in a way that doesn't really make room for this show anymore. And so, the announcement is that Carter and I will no longer be hosting Solosaurus. We're going to be having one more episode. And after that, we won't be helming the show anymore. But Solosaurus is not going away. It is not going away. It is not going. I'm not going to take this show that I have put a lot of work and effort into and bury it, because Martin Gonzalez has very graciously agreed to take over hosting the show for us. And so what we're going to do is next episode, we're going to have another review with Martin on the show, and a guest. Who's the guest who's going to be joining us next time, Martin?
So next episode, we will be asking Michael Eckenfels to be joining us as well. A little bit about Michael. He's been professionally reviewing war games for a very, very, very long time. He's also a very prominent solo gamer, and so he's going to be helping us bring his perspective to what game are we reviewing next week, or is that something we can't talk about? That's a secret.
Ooh, let's keep it secret and just say it's a big one that many of you have asked for a review of for a very long time. Is that tantalizing enough, you think?
I'm tantalized. Yeah, but Michael Eckenfels is joining us next week, so it'll be 3 people on the pod.
Possibly 4 if I can get Carter to join us as well. So
that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can get all 4 of us together for one last hurrah before Carter and I relinquish control of the show. But I just want to say, when I thought about who would be the right person to take this over and who to ask, Martin was really the first person that came to mind. And the reason is that I've enjoyed the Facebook Solo Board Gamers group for a long time. I think it's a really neat place to go and learn about games and talk about games. And there is no question that Martin is a leading voice in that platform. And he is, sorry that you have to sit here and listen to me say this, Martin, but I'm going to anyway. He is thoughtful, he is energetic, he is charismatic, and he's somebody whose voice I trust, and somebody that when he speaks, I pay attention. And I think that a lot of people do. I just think that Martin has what it takes to take this show into the future. As my time and availability diminishes and as Carter's diminishes, the show is not going to be able to grow and expand and do everything that it's capable of doing with our life being where it is right now. I mean, Martin's the perfect person to take this over. And when I reached out to him and asked him, he was so gracious and so eager to take it on. And I just can't thank you enough, Martin, for being willing to do that and for being willing to carry this show forward. So thank you for doing it. And to all of you listening, I just encourage you strongly to stick with the show. I know that, changing hosts is a big deal for a show, but Martin's got what it takes, and they're going to carry the show in new directions for sure. Still a strong focus on solo games, which is what brought you here in the first place.
Thank you so much for those wonderful words, Brandon, and sentiments. And I just want to say I'm super humbled. I'm super thrilled. I'd be lying if I didn't say I was also super terrified in a good way, as I'm sure that you and Carter were when you started this show a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago now, and very, very honored that you asked me out of the blue. It's not like Brandon and I have known each other for a very, very long time. And Brandon basically just Facebook messaged me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I know this sounds crazy, but what do you think of this? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I felt a dozen emotions in the same. How do I even begin to respond to this? But overwhelmingly is humility. Thank you for entrusting your baby, Solosaurus, into our care, into my care and Michael's care. Promise that we will do it justice. I want to say that, there's no way to properly thank you and Carter for starting this and what you've done and how you've built it up and where it is. And rest assured that we carry the responsibility of that very seriously, and also the responsibility to the audience and what they've come to expect, and why I became a listener myself, because there's just something different, an X factor to this show relative to all the other ones. My usual procedure was, let's look for a new solo podcast and give it like about 10 to 15 minutes. And then how do I feel about this? Moving on. But I never, as soon as I encountered Solosaurus, that's, I stuck with it and became my favorite. So for you to ask us, to take over, like I said, it's a dream, but also a lot of knowing the responsibility that we have and the following in your footsteps. We could never replace you. We could only succeed you. And I will end with this. Please know that any time you or Carter ever want to make a drop in guest appearance, phone a friend, or even just like call us down the road and say, you guys are just not doing what we thought you were going to be doing. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I don't foresee that one.
You are always 1000% welcome to join us and to once again, populate the sound waves of this wonderful thing you started.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I will probably take you up on that, because at some point down the road, I would love to collaborate with you all again. I've enjoyed this talk so much. I would love to come and be part of another review. So yeah, don't hear me say that this is the last time you'll ever hear my voice. I would love to get together and mouth off about board games at some point again in the future. But I'm just super appreciative to you, Martin, and to Michael for taking this on. And one other thing to say here too is I'm very appreciative to the folks at tablefor1.me and the many publishers who have sent us games over the years. We had publishers sending us games when we had 100 listeners. And publishers who had no business sending us games to review were doing so, and we appreciate their trust. We certainly appreciate Stone Valley Games. I cannot say enough good things about Eric and Wendy and the crew over there, who, again, reached out to us as not a small podcast at this point, but also not a major podcast either. We're not the Dice Tower or anywhere close, for those of you who are trying to guess our subscriber count. We're not anything close to that. And for Eric to reach out and offer a sponsorship and to support us by sending review copies was really generous of him and something we appreciate. But most of all, thank you to all of you who have listened to this show, who have given us your trust, who have bought games on our recommendation. I've gotten so many of those messages over the years that I think, oh, you poor folks, you don't have any better voice in your life to recommend games to you. But I just humbled by your trust and support and love over these past couple of years. I mean, just this week, I had a listener who just said, hey, I loved your review of Charlemagne. Let me send you a copy of Agricola, Master of Britain. Knowing, as I had to tell him, we're not going to continue hosting the show. He was like, that's okay. Just thanks for doing it. And here's a copy of this game. That's not the first time that's happened. And you all have been so kind and supportive. So thank you. Thank you so much for all the ways that you've done that over the years. We love you and appreciate you very much. And I'm happy to speak for Carter in that regard, even though he's not here for this episode. So yeah, that's the big announcement. This is a long episode. I was telling Martin before this, I like to keep things to a tight 45, but it's not going to be that. It's not going to be that way this time, but that's okay. It's a big game and a big announcement, so it calls for a bigger episode. So next week, 2 weeks from now, we will be releasing our next big review, the last review with me, and hopefully Carter is part of that. And then from then on, it will be Martin and Michael's show. Before we end this episode, just a couple of quick things to say. First of all, this show is a member of the Dice Tower Network, so you can go and check out other shows in that network and find other great shows about board games. You can find those at dicetower.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, which are about to get a lot better when Martin takes over and posts, regularly, because that's not something that I'm good at. You can follow us on Instagram at Solosaurus Podcast. Also, you can go and rate and review the show on iTunes if you've not done that already. We've got a lot of you out there who have done that. We're very appreciative. If you haven't done that, please go ahead and take a minute to do so. It really helps other people to find the show. And lastly, we do have that beautiful yellow and purple dinosaur that we have on our logo available as a micro badge on Board Game Geek. And you can get one for yourself just by sending me a message. And that you can find me on there. I'll be happy to spot you the geek gold you need to get that for yourself. But all right, that's all we've got for this episode, folks. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
I'm Martin Gonzalez.
And this is Solosaurus.